thanks for coming out. As I was talking about earlier, this is a great experience, a great school, great atmosphere. I'm very happy to do this event, and I hope to do a few more after this. So in regards to education, how did we get to this crisis where we're at? And there we see some of the problems with what was education, what is education. You know, you have John Dewey on the left, one of the co-founders of modern education. Horace Mann on the right, another one. You know, more along the lines of socialists and humanists that took over and started this current problem, which is public education. You know, and then modern day we have, you know, the Department of Education was founded. That's unconstitutional. We all know that. UNESCO, that should have nothing to do with education in this country. Nothing. Right. Yet it plays a part, along with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Obviously, they provide a ton of money towards public education, and also a lot of the dioceses. Since Common Core is now pushed into Catholic schools, Lutheran schools, all of that stuff. So that's a part of it as well. That's a big problem. But everything you see here is fairly modern. And into the 20th century, it really took off, and that's where we find ourselves. Where we find ourselves now, a big crisis in education. Where have we gone wrong? You know, and we were talking about the communists earlier, and this is a quote that I use a lot in some of our presentations here, and it comes from William Z. Foster, who was the Communist Party chairman from about 1945 on. But he, in his book Toward a Soviet America, he said, among the elementary measures the American government will adopt to further the cultural revolution are the following. The schools, colleges, universities will be coordinated and grouped under a national Department of Education and its state and local branches. The studies will be revolutionized, being cleansed of religious, patriotic, and other features of the bourgeois ideology. So you can see there, this was happening long before Common Core. People wanted to take over education. So you see it, and look what he wants out: religion. It's got to go. So he wanted it gone, and they've done a good job with that. Because in public education, you're not getting any God, but you are getting something else. You're getting zero population growth. It's up to you, no more than 2. That was spotted at a public school. You also have this mural that was that's in Burnt Hills High School. It says, "The Earth Pledge. I pledge allegiance to the earth and all its sacred parts, its water, land, and living things, and all its living hearts." Just think about that, though. You're praising Earth like it's a deity, but it doesn't take into account what really brought us here, and that is God. So it's saying, all right, we'll take this fact. We have to worship the earth, but we'll forget about God. And then one of the other things that's been going on locally and nationally as well, the Shnenda Hoa gender policy, where they now have the bathrooms for transgender individuals. That's paid for with your tax dollars, but don't mention God in school. And with that said, Matt Hopkins is going to take over from here. As I was telling you, everybody before, he is absolutely phenomenal. My son goes to the school. I am heavily biased. I think the school is fantastic. Jonathan's kids go here as well. And
Joe Mara.
Yep.
Carol Fontana.
Matt, thank you very much.
So a little background. You are in Augustine Classical Academy. This is a 6-year-old startup independent school. We have founding parents here. Joan Mara and Carol Fontana were among the faithful who heard the vision and had been looking around, much as probably all of you have been looking around saying, this isn't right, there's got to be another way. And when they saw the option that we were trying to roll out, they jumped in behind it, and we were really, really grateful for the families of those first 9 students that we started with 6 years ago. My own path getting here is probably pretty familiar to many of you. I had attended public schools and some private schools. I use that word private growing up, but certainly didn't have a bias against one or the other. And spent a good 10, 12 years working in public schools and was very optimistic. I was optimistic about my ability to influence the schools. I was optimistic about what I knew about U.S. history and the possibility that the roots of this nation would influence once again those institutions. I would have called myself very, very optimistic about public schools and saw that as a great place for me both to work but also to be working among the students. And that optimism fell. And over a pretty short period of time, I had a great run working with the local youth ministry called Youth for Christ. I was essentially a missionary to Niskian High School. And in less than a year, my world kind of collapsed. I was kind of a favored son and was constantly sought after as a guru in how to do ministry in a real hostile environment like that. And I remember the defining moment was walking down A Hall, so right opposite the principal's office. I encountered a student that had come to the Lord through the ministry at the school, and she was a senior and kind of a ministry machine. Had herself led quite a few other students to Christ in the few years that she had been a believer. And she was sitting, leaning against her locker on the floor, head on her folded arms over her knees. And I assumed it was AP season, the end of the year. She was a senior, very high-powered, headed to Cornell, that she was just kind of wiped out. And I came up and I nudged her with my knee and said, "Vic, how you doing?" She looked up, she was crying. So I sat down next to her. And we talked a little bit, and finally she looked at me and said, we talk all the time about influencing this place. That's what we want to do. We want to be salt and light in this place. And she looked and she said, "We're not influencing them. They're influencing us." And then she stopped, hesitated a little bit longer, and looked at me and says, "I'm not influencing them. They're influencing me." And in that moment, I realized that my energy was being wrongly spent. It is absolutely a mission field. Public schools are a place, there need to be people there, reaching out to those kids. But I knew that my heart was really for discipleship, and that what I needed was a bunch of parachutes. That as these kids, as their eyes were open to where they were at, I needed a way to get them out. And there needed to be some place for them to go, and I didn't know where that was. I really didn't. I had no clue of where that was. I didn't really understand what I was struggling with and what was wrong. And then I had a neat opportunity to read some of John Taylor Gatto's material. Any of you know John Taylor Gatto? G-A-T-T-O. He was New York City Teacher of the Year, 1989, 1990, 1991, and the New York State Teacher of the Year in 1991. And at the end of his run of the state and the city Teacher of the Year awards, banquets, and being feted, well, actually, it would start even before that. I think it was in the middle year. He came home, flopped himself down on his couch, looked at his wife, and said, "This is a bunch of garbage. I can't believe I'm being heralded as this Superman when really I know it's rotten to the core. This system's broken." And like all wise wives, and I hope all of you have wives as wise as his, she turned to him and said, "Well, how do you know it's broken? The only way you can know it's broken is if you know what it's supposed to do in the first place. I know when my computer's not working because I know what it's supposed to do. So when it stops doing what it's supposed to do, I can say it's broken. I have some authority there because I know what it's supposed to do." And so she was saying to him, "Well, what authority do you have? How do you know what it's supposed to do in the first place?" And he said, "You're right. You're right. I can't sit here and say it's broken, so I know what it is." And so he did his homework. And he obviously had to go back, and he read. The images are gone. But he read Horace Mann. What was Horace Mann thinking when he kicked off the schools? The first public schools in North America that were compulsory education in North America. That was in Massachusetts. And then later, nationwide compulsory education came a little bit later and was largely designed and architected by John Dewey. And so he read Dewey. He read a lot of Dewey. And he ultimately concluded that indeed the system was not broken. It was doing exactly what it was intended to do. And I'm not here to be all dark and cynical. In many ways, it's funny. How many of you have heard the one or two of the Duke Pesta speeches? Most.
I've not been present.
But you've heard him. You heard him afterwards. Okay, so Duke Pesta is a national speaker who was brought in twice by the John Birch Society, 1 year apart, to speak first on Common Core. It was his first topic, and he exposed kind of the dark underbelly of Common. It's not so under. It's really all around, isn't it? There aren't really any pretty sides to it of Common Core. And then he came back again and gave more of an overview of just the history of American education, what we have and how we got to where we are, what we are. I joked with him after the last talk. I've gotten to know him over those 2 times, got to have lunch with him, and said, well, you really just set yourself up for one more visit. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, you can't tell us what's going on without then saying, what are you going to do about it? And so really, my hope tonight is that I can be that third talk in his stead and tell you what at least some of us have done about it. So, Gatto concluded the system was indeed not broken. It was working as it had. And my wife and I read some of Gatto's stuff, and our jaws dropped, and we realized, yeah, of course, that's right. That's it. And like most of us, we then said those, they're good starting words, but they often are very foolish words. Well, we're not going to be like our parents. We're not going to go down that road. Well, most of us are. How many of you can want to confess right now that you are oh so much like your parents, in the good ways and the bad? Right. And I like an illustration of athletics. If I'm, if a Mara, or no, we'll pick on a Hopkins. I have 9 children, and there is a sport in my family that is dominant. We live on water. Both my wife and I met on a rowing team, on a college rowing team. Rowing is what makes the Hopkins family go. If a Hopkins child, for some unfathomable reason, decided that rowing was not something they were going to do, it would not be enough for them to say, I'm not rowing. They would have to go out and pursue something else. Learn that something else, practice it, and then they would indeed no longer be a rower. Right? You have to have something else. So here we were, my wife and I, looking and knowing this, especially I'm the son of an alcoholic, so this is something I'm very dialed into. It's not enough to say, I don't want that. You have to know what you want and then aggressively pursue it. Practice it, learn it, do it. Be it. And so we started looking around and listening for what were the options out there. We, like most New Yorkers, were extremely naive to the reality that there actually were options. We, like most New Yorkers, believed that education was invented around 1900 at a very high pinnacle, so that we could have the ever-present conviction that next year the standards are going to drop and the costs are going to go up. So it's somewhere about 1900, education started at very low price and very high standards, so that we can have this decline, and we haven't yet intersected, and we can keep going. So life is good. It never dawned on me that maybe there was something before that. I hadn't considered it. So it wasn't until we heard a guy named Douglas Wilson interviewed on the radio by Chuck Colson. Anybody familiar with Chuck Colson? One of the plumbers, one of Nixon's henchmen who went off to jail and had a really remarkable turnaround in his life and became a powerful advocate. Became a Christian in jail, and then became a powerful advocate for the rights of prisoners in jail. He founded a ministry called Prison Fellowship, and became a powerful advocate for rigorous and what he now would call classical. No longer. He died 2 years ago. I got a chance to meet with him a year before he died. It was pretty awesome. Great time. There is a video, an audio recording of Chuck Colson advocating for classical Christian schools on the Association of Classical Christian Schools website that I got to sit in as he was being interviewed. It's great time. Anyway, so we heard Chuck Colson interviewing Douglas Wilson, and Douglas Wilson in Christian Reformed circles is the founder of the revival of classical Christian education, the one who dusted off some of the literature about some of the original documents, not original, but some of the more contemporary documents about what education looked like prior to the reforms that we are subject to today. And he founded a school in Moscow, Idaho, about 30 years now, and since then that school has been a pattern for many others, and ours is one of those. We tend to we tend towards chronological snobbery. Anybody familiar with this term? If you're an Augustine student, you'd all be nodding your heads right now because they all take logic in 7th or 8th grade. And in the course of logic, they study fallacies. And most of them have a favorite fallacy, and it's usually chronological snobbery. And that's the fallacious thinking, popular yet not valid form of reasoning that says that just because something is old or something is new, it's either good or bad. You know, the good old days. As soon as someone says the good old days, we roll our eyes back in our head and we realize, you know what? If your skin was black, the good old days wasn't so good. You know? And, you know, there are all kinds of circumstances where the good old days wasn't so great. You know, if you came up with polio, not so good. You know, all kinds of... So we all roll our eyes and we know, okay, this is, you know, we're not buying this. And similarly, when people automatically assume if something's new, it's good. And we tend towards this. And it clouds our vision. It keeps us from seeing what things really are. And especially in New York, where we have this monstrosity called the New York State Board of Regents that dominates the educational landscape, we all kind of presume that that's how things are. And if they're rolling out something new, then it must be better. And we actually probably believe it, right? Because it can't be worse, can it? No, it actually does get worse. You know, the idea that education has... Well, let me give you a nifty little picture. Our school is 6 years old. In the 6 years that our school has existed, American public education has been rescued by first No Child Left Behind, Race to the Top, and now Common Core. 3 national initiatives to rescue education in the 6 years that we've just had this tiny little school. And our notion is that somehow new has got to be better, and so we've got to have something new, and we've got to fix and keep going. And in that interview with Douglas Wilson, my wife and I kind of had the scales falling from our eyes, and we were realizing, wait, new isn't always better, obviously. And we heard for the first time that there was this incredible legacy of education in the Western world. And as a believer, Augustine Classical Academy is unapologetically a classical and Christian school. So as a believer, as a Christian, I look and I say, wow, we have this phenomenal legacy in the Western world that we are ignoring. So what do we mean by classical? Classical is a simple term that just means that which precedes the contemporary. So it presupposes that there is something before. And for most of us, that's a hard thing to imagine. What was before? And you know, if my skateboard is flat, we call it classical, or skiing, cross-country skiing, where their skis parallel, classical music. You know, that which precedes the contemporary. And in our chronological snobbery inclination, we presume that it's just not so good. In hearing Douglas Wilson talk about his school, we kind of, our eyes were open to the reality that first, we have a legacy. There's something that precedes. And in fact, when you think about it, it doesn't take much thinking to realize that most of the science, math, architecture, literature, music, art that we revere and respect so much in our culture is a product of that previous era. And if you look at the history of education in the Western world from 0 AD and roll yourself forward, you get about 1,800 years of remarkable consistency. Remarkable consistency. And suddenly there's this sharp line where there's a gear shift. And it's that gear shift that divides the classical from the contemporary. And not surprisingly, it's not the advocates of the classical who coined the term classical when it comes to education. It was the likes of John Dewey. He was the first one to popularly use this term in education because he wanted to distinguish between what had come before and what he was proposing. What had come before was often boiled down to a simple phrase: wisdom and eloquence. Our school is named Augustine Classical Academy after St. Augustine, the Bishop of Hippo, who was one of the first church fathers to articulate a philosophy, an idea of how we should teach, what education should be about. And he's the one who said that the mission of education is wisdom and eloquence. Wisdom being right knowledge properly applied. You can know what's right, but if you can't live it, you're not wise. You're a fool. Right? So wisdom is knowing the truth and being able to apply it. And then eloquence is simply being able to express that and communicate that. This is powerful, powerful image of education. If you are wise, you know what's true, and you can live it, and then you can express it, you can change the world. Dewey refuted that. Literally, those words said, no, the classical world had it wrong. Wisdom and eloquence is not what it's about. Education, the mission of education is, anybody know? According to John Dewey?
Produce factory workers.
Exactly. Citizenship training and vocational training. All right? We need worker bees. What is citizenship training? Anybody want to go dark and conspiratorial on me? You're welcome. You're okay here. It's safe.
Waters.
Yeah. We need compliant. We need compliant folks for this society. You know, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Inventory and control.
Absolutely. Inventory and control. Perfect. Yeah, these are his very words. Citizenship training and vocational training. This is the mission of education. Ironically, well, we're a classical school, so we don't hesitate to quote the bigs. Aristotle, who had a lot to say about education, is the first to coin the term liberal arts. And in the Greek world, in the world of Athens, liberal doesn't mean what it means today, the connotations that it has today in our culture, the ironic twisting of it, but it means free. And the liberal arts were those things that a free man needed to know in order to be able to participate in their democracy. They didn't have a republic, right? So they didn't have principles on which their government was built on. They relied on, a well-trained mind for their democracy to operate. And so they had this notion of the liberal arts. And I think if Aristotle had walked into our schools today, he would walk around and say, wow, you guys knocked the ball out of the park for your slaves. Now where are you educating your freemen? Show me what you're doing with your freemen, because you're killing it with your slaves. Vocational training and citizenship training, you guys are doing a great job. Now show me where your freemen are being taught the liberal arts. Okay, so where are we going with this? It's going to be hard for me to keep track of all this. Ultimately, for Augustine, the mission was discipleship. And just as our school is unapologetically a classical and Christian school, I myself am unapologetically a Christian. And the history of the Western world, education in the Western world, is undeniably intertwined with its Christian roots. That which we call schools are largely the product of early Christians huddling up together, opening up their Bibles and recognizing that they, as parents, have a responsibility for discipling their own. And so their response was, how best are we going to do this? And they looked and said, well, let's cooperate a little bit. And so that which we call school, where we're teaching math and science and history and literature, languages, is not the product of vocational training. It's the product of people desiring to disciple well. Someone piped up and said, math, let's teach them math. And John Dewey over in the corner said, yes, because I'll get good STEM jobs. And they said, who are you? Shut up. No, they said, no, we want our students to study math, because when we scratch the top layer of the created order, we find math. And if we want our kids to see the world rightly and see the way of the world God does, they're going to have to know some math. Because math, if you want to understand how God thinks, you've got to study some math. That's the order of things. And another person said science. And Dewey said again, yeah, STEM job, STEM job. And they said, shut up. No. Our kids are going to study science, because if they want to know how God sees the world, they've got to see what he's done, what he's created. You want to know what Steve Jobs is about? Take apart some of his stuff. And you'll understand how that guy's head works. You want to understand how God works? You want to see the world rightly through God's eyes? Time to study some science. Not all our kids are going to be scientists. Not all our kids are going to be mathematicians. But we want them to see the world rightly. History, someone said. And John Dewey had nothing to say. He was silent. And someone said, yeah, why? And I said, because we want our students to be able to see God's providential hand working through the lives of men over time. We want them to know it. We want them to set up little monuments, stand up a rock on its end, so people will come by and say, what happened here? Are you familiar with the story from Joshua? Israelites crossing the Jordan, and one of the elders from each of the 12 tribes is told, pick up a stone from the bottom of the river, make up a pile, so that every generation that comes afterwards will say, what happened here? And you'll tell them. You'll tell them the story. Throughout the Old Testament, they're told, take a stone and stand it up on its end, unnaturally, so that someone will come by and say, what happened here? Very much we want this place, and we want every kid that walks out of this building to be a standing stone. Unnatural. The people stop and say, what's that? How is that? What happened that stands the way it does? And they said, history. Languages. Yeah, we got to study languages. Why? I get good jobs. No. Because what's happening right here, what's coming out of my mouth, what's going into your ears, the conversation that's even happening between your ears is a reflection of the divine. In the beginning was the Word. God did not sit one day, look down and say, oh, look at that clever thing they're doing. That's awesome. I'll use that to reveal myself to them. And they write it down. That's great. No, it's the other way around. It's the other way around. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. John 1. 1. 1 John 1. No, John 1. 1. John 1. Sorry. Gospel of John, chapter 1, verse 1. Yeah. And so, language is critical. That we're teaching our kids to be articulate and winsome. This is absolutely imperative. My daughter drove home. I drove her home from the SATs a month ago. And I asked her how it went, and she's done very, very well. And she lamented that they had done what they had said they were going to do. The anachronistic SAT words are now being purged. And I was delighted that my 11th grade daughter, I was saddened by the whole event, but I was delighted by my 11th grade daughter recognizing the import of that. Because I can only express to you, and you can only understand, that which we have language for. Ideas do not exist apart from language. If that isn't a reflection of the divine, I don't know what is. Well, we cannot understand anything apart from words. You limit our words, you limit our understanding. Literacy in the 13 colonies prior to independence was 98%. Ted Kennedy confessed this a year or two before he was diagnosed with cancer and died, that Massachusetts, from the moment Horace Mann started his schools, has not reached, no state has reached the level of literacy that was in Massachusetts prior to the establishment of the mandatory schooling. And we have been dumbing it down bit by bit. Many of you know Pearson Company, everyone's favorite. Their top U.S. history textbook has a non-verbatim copy of the Constitution in it. And they apologize for that by saying, well, we got the ideas. Yeah. Well, right there, they're conceding that ideas can exist apart from words, which is foolishness, complete nonsense. Complete nonsense. And so the early church looked around and said, languages, our kids are going to be masters of language. They are going to be articulate because this is a reflection of the divine. We can't ask them to hold and handle God's word rightly. We can't ask them to listen to a sermon if they themselves cannot handle language themselves. All right? And so terrifyingly, we're creating a society that, doesn't have words. So ultimately, what we have is discipleship. Truly. That's what we as believers, we say, this is our history, this is what they did, and we look at John Dewey and we say, he's discipling too. But he's not discipling to Christ. He's not discipling to our God, and so, he's not an option. Just not an option. We're not going to try to fix it. We're not going to create a Christian school that's going to fix Common Core or teach the regions, but put a thin layer of Jesus on top and make it good, and swirl it around. No, we're not called to redeem a fallen, God-rejecting philosophy. We're called to disciple our own. And our conviction is that all education is discipleship. If I'm teaching you anything, 2 + 2 = 4. Yes?
Yes.
Taught it. What's the next question that she's going to come across her head if she's never heard that before? The clock is ticking. Sooner or later, she's going to say, why? And if I say, because that's what it is, she has learned that there is chaos, and out of that chaos comes a little bit of something, and it just is. It exists. Or I can tell her, well, 2 + 2 = 4, because it reflects God's nature and His order. And actually, 2 + 2 = 4, and 4 + 4 = 8, and I can just unfold all that order in front of you. Or I can tell you that actually that little bit of truth exists independent of a sovereign God. I'm not going to do that. John Dewey will do that. He'll tell you that there's truth apart from God. I'm absolutely sold out and convinced that there is no such thing. No such thing. But we have robbed a generation of that. You know, you walk into any contemporary school, and there are three truths that they're locked in on. They'll argue about all kinds of things, but the first truth they'll lock in on is that truth doesn't really exist. And if somehow it did exist, you couldn't know it. And if somehow you could know it, you can't express it. And so we've ended up with a generation that's been debunked because they, like all of us, are wired to express truth and to know truth and to pursue truth. And yet we've told them there isn't any. And that they don't have anything they can say. And why do we have this explosion of tattoos in our culture? I think it's because we have a bunch of people, a bunch of kids, who, in their very nature, the beginning was the Word. They're created in God's image, out of His greatness, for greatness, and they've been told there's nothing for them. And they can't say anything. But they are going to. They're going to say something. They don't know what it is. Because we've ripped off and stolen the channel knob on their radios, and all we've left them with is the volume knob. I don't know what it means, but it's loud! Because that's all I've got! All I've got left is loud! It's all over me! But I can't tell you what I'm saying, and I can't tell you what it means. Because I've been told there's nothing I can say. So all I've got left is loud. All education is discipleship. All education is discipleship. They're discipling to something or somebody. So the only question is who and to what. Right? They can teach you multiplication tables faster maybe than we can. But who are they discipling to? Where are we going? Well, of course. Who's next? Charlemagne. 800s, Holy Roman Emperor. And he kicks off this renaissance in medieval Europe, which so many call the Dark Ages, but it was a pretty awesome time. Universities are being founded all over the place. Universities. What's a university? Why universities? An understanding of a singularity, of a universality. All of truth is unified. They understood this. They didn't believe. We have multiversities today. Scattered craziness. They understood, there is a single truth that everything falls under it. This is awesome. We have physicists and mathematicians that get dangerously close to this kind of thinking because they're looking for the theory of everything. Because they know, it all keeps coming back to one thing. What is this? So Charlemagne is kicking off these universities, and this is where we really see the pattern of education in the Western world entrenched, with first what we know as the trivium in classical education, then the quadrivium. So this was a course of study that recognized that students develop through three distinct cognitive phases. And so this is a pattern you're going to see in schools like ours, recognizing first a grammar phase, meaning those younger school years. And we still have people who call elementary school grammar school. Where does that come from? Where do those 6 years of elementary school, followed by 2 years of middle school, followed by 4 years of high school come from? Where did that come from? John Dewey didn't invent it, that's for sure. It was born in Charlemagne's era, where they recognized that, those first 6 years, those students have a tremendous propensity for learning the what of a subject. They just soak it up. We have a family was visiting today from China, and they're worried about their kindergartner figuring out the language thing. And I kind of laughed, and I said, well, you know what? Probably going to work the other way, kids. My parents picked my family up and dropped us in French-speaking schools in Brussels, Belgium, cold turkey, when I was in 6th grade. I'd like to say I hit the ground running, but I knocked out 3 or 4 teeth along the way. My story is not extraordinary. I had 2 younger siblings and an older one. And we remember being terrified, going through the stores with this list of school supplies we had to get. They were given on the first day. And my mom, who is a Swede and grew up in Sweden and had studied some French, is working her way through the stores trying to figure it out. And we're behind her. Mom, no, the red one, not that one. And by the time we were back in the stores for Christmas, the tables are completely turned. Like, Mom, you sound like an American. You're killing us here. We'll handle it, please. This is not unusual. My dad, who had to do his job in French, he's a great intellect. Was a great intellect. He died 2 weeks ago. Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. More to that story. He mastered the language in the written form, but spoke like a cow, and we would mock him all the time. And he would come right back and say, tell me why I'm supposed to do it that way. And we thought, well, I don't know. I don't know, we just soaked it up. We didn't understand it. We just soaked it up. Younger children have that great propensity for soaking it up. And there's a sweet spot, those 6 years. Historically, the Western world has understood that. And schools have been designed around that. Designed around kids who want to soak it up. Let's teach them to the grain that exists inside of them. And knowing that knowledge that we can pump into their heads is going to be really valuable. That's literacy. That's something they can work with later. Right? You know, how many of you, how are you going to make out if you don't know your multiplication tables as an adult? Not so good. Not so good. There's all kinds of information that we need to absorb. And historically, the Western world understood that. And understood that younger children have a great propensity for that. Let's pump it into them. Knowing that window's going to close. Eventually, those middle school, why years are going to show up. So let's rearrange. And instead of teaching to the what, let's start teaching to the why. And so we do that. And the historic pattern in the Western world was to do just that. And that's where middle school comes from. We call it dialectic. A dialectic is two sides, a wrestling. The die of dialogue, 2 parts. Understanding. So we begin with a full course of logic, a year of categorical and propositional logic. If you're going to ask those questions, let's learn to ask them properly. Let's learn to evaluate the answers you're going to get, and then rephrase the question to get the answer that you do want. And that's where their heads are at. It doesn't mean they're not learning any more what. Of course, there's always going to be more what. If they go to med school, they're going to have to memorize a ton of anatomy. They're always going to have what, but they're going to do that what a whole lot better because of the memorization they did as a kid and the paths they grouped in their head at a time when that's what they wanted to do, and that was fun. You know, how many little boys do you know who can tell you the names of 100 dinosaurs and how they're spelled, even the ones that sound like a T but actually are a P, and they just do it. They know it. They can do it. So we teach that sweet spot. And then when they hit that dialectic years and we transition with them. And then ultimately, when they're kind of sick of the why and they want to start telling us what they think, we don't hesitate to shift gears again to what's called rhetoric, which is now the synthesis. What do you think? Right? So this pattern was established in the schools that Charlemagne kicked off and pretty much rolled consistently all the way through. And up until John Dewey came along and tried to rewrite everything. You know, Christendom prior to 1900 didn't talk about square pegs in round holes in schools. If we'd asked them those questions, if we'd been back 300 years from now and asked about what do you do with the square peg kids, they would have said, what are you talking about? What do you mean? You know, if we stood up in a public arena and I jumped up on a table and said, everybody, I need your attention. How many of you are optimistic about the direction of education? They would have laughed. What a foolish question. What a foolish question. They would have done the math. Education is discipleship. We're the recipients of God's revealed word. We have everything we need. It's going to be fine. Of course, it's always been fine. What are you talking about? Are we going to mess it up? Sure, we're going to mess it up. Mess up our institutions all the time, but is God faithful and do we have what we need? Yeah. We're optimistic. You walk into a public arena, if I go down to cross gates and jump up on a table in the food court and get everybody's attention and say, how many of you are optimistic about education? They're going to laugh as well. Why? Because they know next year standards will drop and the cost will go up. So where do we go? Kind of the next step along the line is this the disaster of mandatory state-run education. Kind of the next step along the line in the historical trail. And Duke Pesta spoke a good bit about this and made a pretty strong case for it being a disaster. And really, I would like to point out that the real disaster is that discipleship, ultimately, is the responsibility of parents. You know, I often say, if you go to an educator in any contemporary context and ask them what their 10 biggest headaches are, 9 out of 10 are going to relate to parents failing to educate their kids. When the city of Mechanicville came here, a delightful visit, they sent 2 or 3 people from the school district to check us out to find out if we were substantively equivalent. What we were teaching was substantively equivalent to the vaunted New York State Board of Regents curriculum. And they spent about an hour and a half and concluded that indeed we were equivalent or better. And in talking with them, I said this to them. So 9 out of 10 of the headaches that contemporary educators have relate to parents not raising their kids properly. And they laughed and said, no, 10 out of 10, 10. And I said, I keep saying 9 out of 10 just to be gracious. But if that's the case, and it really is, we as schools need to make sure that we are honoring parents and backing up parents in that responsibility and not undermining them. And the disaster of a government-run education is not that necessarily the government's so evil. It can be, and I have all my misgivings. But as soon as someone steps in lieu of the parents, or encourages the parents to abdicate, or permits or facilitates the parents to abdicate that responsibility, you're in big trouble. You're in a whole heap of trouble. And as a culture, that's what we're facing right now. And the disaster of government schools is not that the Christians, abandoned it, and we'll just get prayer back in schools, it'll be okay. No. The problem is, as long as we have someone other than our families driving education, we don't have a chance. And I say that because of what I know of what we are as a country. We are a republic. Duke Pesta had a horrible statistic he had from his own classes where he was asking his students, he would poll them before every class started, every semester started, how many of them could identify some of the founding fathers, did they think we were a democracy or a republic, and invariably they believed we were a democracy. This is a scary, scary statistic, because what is the founding? What is the operative dynamic of a democracy? How do you decide what's right or wrong in a democracy? How do you decide what to do?
Mob rule.
The majority.
Majority rule.
Majority, right? Majority rule, and there's a place for that. There's a place for that. But how does that distinguish from a republic? The simple definition of a republic is government by the consent of the governed. But the more complex reality is that consent is yielded through some shared principles. We in our country have a constitution. That constitution is the product of thinking that, thinking that is, I'm going to say it, we are a Christian nation. We're not a nation of Christians. We're not a nation that's a theocracy. But the founding of our republic is on Christian philosophy, Christian ideals. We are right to put a copy of the Ten Commandments in every courtroom because our entire legal system is based on this. It's not based on the Quran. It's based on the Bible. That's it. And so whether you are a Bible believer, a Bible embracer or not, this is the country you live in, like it or not. And threatening that foundation threatens our very republic, because we cannot live apart, our republic cannot stand apart from the principles on which it's built. We will become a democracy. The majority will rule.
I think we're pretty much there.
Yeah. I'll be cynical with you.
There's
Except,
our
you know what?
ideal, and then there's where we are today.
Except, you know what, brother? I have a big bow. I have a really big bow.
I'm on your side.
And in these 6 years, our bow has gotten really strong. And we can shoot really, really strong, straight arrows right out of these doors into the culture. And the kids that we are training have sharp intellects and soft and winsome tongues. And they can change way more than any majority can articulate. And that's what we need. That's what a republic needs. Our founding fathers, the wisdom of their mixed government was they recognized the role for democracy, but they also wanted an aristocracy. They knew that there was a place for those that were equipped to guard and articulate and rehash again and again what those principles were. We read a lot of old books at Augustine because we know that our kids need to be trained in letting the wisdom of the ages blow through their brains and rehash these questions again and again. We cannot, as a culture, we cannot, as believers, become complacent. I mean, how many of you have picked up your Bible and read something that you realize, how is I've read this? I know I've read this book a million times, or this section many times. I've never seen these words before. Right? It happens all the time. Our kids, we want to train them in just that activity. of picking up challenging stuff. We do a Shakespeare production every year, not because we're a bunch of intellectual literature snobs, but because we want our kids to develop an appetite for big ideas and big words expressed in really big ways. That they think that's cool and that they can do it and they're not afraid of it. So that when they pick up a document like our Constitution, they don't need Pearson to dumb it down for them. They drink it in and say, wow, there's something there. You know? And they look at, the other day we were looking at the progressive amendments. So that would be income tax and prohibition and the rearranging of our voting laws, women's suffrage, response to women's suffrage. And I was delighted. When they were hashing on, I asked them, so how many of these are truly progressive from what you understand of progressive philosophy?
Senators being popular.
Oh, yes. Right. Yes, and the rearranging and the revoting of 1913, senators became popularly voted instead of voted out of their. They became less of an aristocracy, voted out of their state legislatures. Right. And so I was asking them, so how many of these do you really think were progressive, truly in their nature? And they voted the women's suffrage one out. So it didn't belong. It didn't belong. Why do you think? Because they didn't buy the notion that this was a grassroots movement. Instead, they looked and they said, the backbone of this country is the family. And the Founding Fathers didn't designate, didn't declare women unfit to vote. They were not a bunch of misogynistic jerks. Rather, they were ones who recognized this country will rise and fall on the strength of its families. And so we will have one vote per family. We'll let the head of that family have that vote. It wasn't about excluding women. It was about putting the family at the center. And that had been long since been lost. At the point, by the time we got to 1913, that notion was long since gone. And so our students said this wasn't, progressive can't claim this one. This one was handed to them by the generations before who abandoned that understanding that really it's about our families. And then, of course, that rolls back to education being discipleship, because that's where that discipleship's going to happen. So yeah, I got a big bow. We're shooting big arrows. I'm not worried. I got a big God and a big bow. And so what to do? It's good. Can we go there? This is where Duke Pesta really, I felt like, let me down. I wanted to hear it. Say the words, buddy. Say the words. Pull the trigger. What to do? First, what we shouldn't do. We shouldn't try to save the public schools. Let them go down. We shouldn't complain about Common Core. Don't waste a breath on Common Core. Who cares? Who cares? You're going to get it on the installment plan anyway. It's coming anyway. Who cares? Let it go. I highly recommend reading some Douglas Wilson. Douglas Wilson, you can write it down. He is in a tiny little town called Moscow, Idaho. It's a college town in a state with a very low population, in a city that we would barely call a city, right? So I would call the population of Moscow, Idaho, imagine it. It's a state university town. So probably what? Low birth rate, and a whole lot of puffed up intellectuals leaning towards very liberal philosophy and politics, and then a handful of just regular folks, many of whom are believers, who have large families. And Douglas Wilson has a prediction. He believes that when the town of Moscow, Idaho, city of Moscow, Idaho, reaches the 50% tipping point of believing families pulling their kids out of the public schools, that the public schools will collapse. Because the public schools operate on the premise that I'm going to send my kids there and submit to it. They need me to raise my kids properly so that they can manipulate them. They can't deal with a bunch of folks who've advocated that responsibility. If that's the only people who send their kids to the public schools, it's going to be a mess. And we see this, right? We see this in urban schools. They're out of control and they're collapsing. And they survive because many of us feel that somehow we're supposed to be salt and light in the public schools. Baloney. Baloney. Jesus absolutely said we are to be fishers of men, but he never said to use our children as bait. Discipleship. That's what we're called to do. Proverbs 23. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. This is a promise and a threat if you fail. It's a promise. It does not say, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. But make sure you hand him over to the pagans towards the end, because God's people are not fully equipped to do the job themselves. Baloney. Baloney. I often get people telling me that they're concerned about I don't want to send my kids to a Christian school because there's this bubble. It's too safe, and I want them to don't want to be too sheltered, and want them to know what the real world's like, what the real world is like. Right? I hear this often. I would have said this 10 years ago. These are my words. No way, no way. First, that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to make a bubble for our kids. It's exactly what we're called to do. You do it every day. You moderate what you listen to, what you read, right? You turn the radio off, you change the channel on the TV when some garbage comes on. You guard yourself, you put a hedge up around yourself. Why would you not do it for your own kids? Right? Secondly, real world? Real world? Really? Is the tomb empty? Is the tomb empty? Yeah. He is risen. That changes everything. Changes everything. Absolutely. If I walk around outside yelling, gravity does not apply to me! Gravity does not apply to me! Even if I just say it to my watch quietly, it's not going to be long before people think I'm crazy. And they're right to think I'm crazy. Because it's evident that gravity does apply to me, even as I walk down the street. So the world out there that lives in rejection of an empty tomb, that is not the real world. It's just ain't. Shame on us for thinking we've got to prepare our kids for the real world. No! We need to make sure they're not prepared for our kids. Boom! Other way around. Other way around. Because they don't have a clue. They don't have a clue. And we're called to be that salt and light. That's the salt and light. Not send them into public schools to get eaten alive. I have a son who wants to be a soldier. He's 5. Maybe one day he'll be one. But only after he's physically mature, emotionally, socially mature, equipped, trained, surrounded by a band of brothers. Maybe then he can go. But not at 5. I'd be a fool to send him. Absolutely. So, what do? Don't send them there. Pull them out. If you're a parent, school-age kids, get them out. If you're a grandparent, have school-age kids, get them out. If you're not one of those people, help someone else get theirs out. There are not many options. I don't know what this crowd is like. I don't know if you're sympathetic to a Christian worldview or not. There are not many options if you're not sympathetic to a Christian worldview. The idea of an independent school, independent from the border regions, is not one that finds a lot of traction in the secular world. But I'm sure there are options. There are people homeschooling their kids. Find them. Help them. Buy their textbooks for them. Come alongside and say, hey, I'll pay for an online course or two. For an upper, kid wants to take AP Calculus, I'll pay for that class. Help them out. Make it happen. Find a school like ours. We're holding it together. We have a big God. It's awesome. We are delighted. We have a 6-year incredible history, but it ain't easy. Don't complain. Don't waste a breath complaining about what's happening in the world around you. Don't waste a minute. I hear Christians doing this all the time. It drives me nuts. If I took a piece of meat and I left it out in the parking lot on a sunny day, what's going to happen? It's going to rot. That's what it does. The wages of sin are death. That's what happens. All right, we're called to be salt. Why? Salt is a preservative. You rub it in. Right? It preserves the meat. That's what we're called to be. We're not supposed to sit around and complain, okay, man. No. You want to make a difference in all this? Forget about Common Core. Forget about the public schools. You will throw your body against that brick wall, all day long. I absolutely believe Douglas Wilson is on the right track. They cannot survive They're very, I mean, you know this. If you thought about these things at all, I mean, the typical, atheist God hater has to climb onto God's lap to slap him in the face. Right? I mean, you cut in front of him in Dunkin' Donuts, and he tells you, "Hey, buddy, that's not right." I'm like, "What do you mean it's not right? Where's right come from?" He has to step into a biblical worldview just to operate. He can't put his feet on the floor of his own worldview. He has to walk around on the boards of a biblical worldview in order to knock them out. Don't waste your time. Don't waste your time. Find somebody that is making a difference and get behind them. Find a school like ours. Find another school. Find people who are homeschooling. Be the parachutes that I talked about when I opened up. Be a parachute. Get somebody out. Get a kid out. We are still a republic. It's not going to take. It will not take more than a few. It will not take more than a few, and I'm absolutely convinced. I mean, I'm the proud daddy. I'm absolutely convinced it's going to be kids from our school that we're going to be reading, and schools like ours that we're going to be reading about. We're going to be wondering, wow, where did that kid come from? And we're going to start reading the bios of some of these politicians and realize, well, okay. We're going to start seeing these people because they're going to get the jobs. They are more articulate. They are better trained. They're wiser. They're more literate. They're going to be able to handle the communication. They're going to be able to handle the messaging in ways that their peers are not going to be able to. They're going to rise to the top, and it's undeniable. They can dumb down the vocabulary for everybody else as much as they want, but not for our kids, and that's going to make a difference. And that's where our energy should be.
What do you have to say about the Christian schools that use the state education rather than the Christian curriculum?
Why in the world would they do that? Why in the world did they do that? Yeah, why would you do that? If your pastor got up in the pulpit on Sunday morning and announced that the New York State Board of Regents had gotten into a sermon teaching schedule and a Sunday school curriculum, and your church was going to be one of the pilot churches piloting this new curriculum, how exciting is that? And you would say,
goodbye.
Yeah.
What? Even if every pastor, priest on the planet, in the country, dropped dead tomorrow morning, all we'd have to do is line up some elders, some deacons, to pick up the 1,800 years of sermons and teaching that we have, blow the dust off, put it on the lectern, and start preaching. And we'd have everything we need. The legacy we have is awesome. And I'm not anti, clergy at all. But what foolishness! Why would you ever turn to an authority that rejects Christ fully? I mean, Board of Regents is in no way in submission to Christ. Why would you put your discipleship in submission to them? And it's not like they're doing a great job. Maybe some non-believers here in the room. I mean, you tell me, Board of Regents, gold standard or no? New York State rates #1 in the nation for how much you spend per student. 19,400 something per student, average in New York State. What we spend. New York State students perform in the bottom half. We're looking to rearrange some math curriculum at our school, and we look anywhere. We'll go anywhere. We'll raid the Egyptians anytime. We're not picky. If someone's doing something excellent, we'll take it. And Singapore math is really excellent. It's very consistent with a biblical worldview. We love it. So we're going down that road. Is anybody in the world looking at Regents math? Ooh, Regents language arts. They're really kicking the can on that one. Wow, that's awesome. No. Now I get parents coming to me all the time saying, "Oh, but what if your kid doesn't have a Regents diploma?" Really? I mean, what do you think a college admissions counselor says when a Regents diploma comes across their desk? Oh, that gold standard state, New York, such high standards. No. Exactly the opposite. They say, okay, what can we do with this? Has this kid overcome? Or is this kid a victim? Is this kid risen above the New York State Board of Regents, or are they stuck in it? Yeah. I would just say, why? Why would you ever do that? Why would you waste 1 minute trying to fix what is broken and in rejection of Christ? Why would you bring it into your home? Why would you ever embrace that when we have this phenomenal legacy that you can dip into anytime you want? I mean, for goodness sake, it's all in public domain. You don't even have to pay copyrights. You don't have to do anything. Like, just print it off the internet and it's yours.
But the scary part is I think there's only 3 schools, Christian schools, that do the Christian curriculum in this area.
Locally, yeah. There are only 2 K through 12. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's a disaster. That's a disaster. And I can tell you that we're struggling. I'll be blunt. You know, financially, we're pinching pennies. We'll be okay. We'll make it. But boy, you want to have an impact? I can tell you where it can have an impact. I can, you know, you want to have an impact on this country? I can tell you families who would send more kids to our school if they had a few more bucks. And I know where those kids will land because I know what's going on with their parents. Yeah. So you want to have an impact? Come talk to me afterwards. I can guarantee you a big impact. You know, good students are going to do well in any situation. No, I by no means think that the public schools are, you know, a shipwreck for everybody. You can put a strong student, a strong teacher is going to succeed in any context, no matter how lousy it is. Doesn't matter. You know, we're not the school for the best students. We're the school for the ones who would get eaten out there and become stars here. Yeah.
For parents who want to have this option, how much does it cost generally?
Well, tuition at Augustine Classical Academy, what is it? Where are we now? Upper school 7.5? Is it 7.5? I should know, right? You should know. You should know. What is it? Upper school, anybody know? So, right, 7.5. Grammar school is it 6 or is it 5.7, 5.5, 5.7? Something like that. We're dirt cheap. And that's a disaster in itself. I mean, popular wisdom in growing a school says, you know, you got to get your tuition to where it covers, it is what it should be. You know, our tuition is way low. It's deflated. You know, it's not covering what it costs to educate each student. And that's a normal pattern for beginning school. So our mission right now is to get our war chest of tuition assistance up, that we can set our tuition like Harvard does at what it costs. But then tell every kid who can't afford it, no worries, we got it, we got you covered. But they set their tuition at what it costs. So anybody who can pay it is paying it. And then that's where we need to get. And we'll get there. But we're not going to get there at the expense of the families that can't pay. To be honest, if I was king, and I haven't thought this a whole lot through, but I thought it through a good bit. If I was king and you put me in charge of education in America, I would say, okay, next school year will be the last school year of the status quo. School taxes will stay the same for everybody for the next 5 years after that. We're not going to change anything. But all the public schools are going to close. And everybody who's interested in running a school has next year to organize a school. You can rent as much or as little space from all the public school buildings that are around, wherever you want. Gym time, auditorium time, classroom time, all you want, shared photocopy, blah, blah, blah. And every kid will have, in New York State, a $19,400 tuition waiver sitting on their head. And the parents can send it anywhere they want. Do you know what the school would look like if every kid walked in with a $19,400 tuition waiver on their head? And you know what happened in urban schools? I mean, I got a lot of friends who got, this would work in an urban context like nobody's business. It'd be challenging because you'd have parents that weren't invested. I mean, our number one concern when a new family comes to us, we don't interview students. We're a school of families. In the same way that if I came to you and said, let's say you had young children in your home, and I came to you and I said, I've got this kid, he's really in crisis, he needs a place to be, would you take him into your house? Oh. Right. Maybe your heart is going to say, no, I'd like to help, but I will do it insofar as it doesn't jeopardize the discipleship, the raising of my own family. If I can do that, because my first responsibility is to my own. You would take him in? Well, I would take him in if I could accomplish that. We have the same attitude. We are partnering with parents as they disciple their kids. So we do not have the option of taking a kid in who they wouldn't take into their own home. So we have to guard these doors. So that's a challenge in an urban setting where you have families who don't have that same value. The school's growing pretty steadily. We were 9 students 6 years ago, and we're just shy of 80 now. We'll probably be just shy of 100 next year. But I think we could have grown a whole lot faster if we opened the doors wide open. But we're really direct with families. We say we're not looking for a client-provider relationship. We're looking for a partnership. If you're wholeheartedly looking to disciple your own and take care of your own and raise your own, and you're looking for partners in doing that, hey, we'd love to be your partner. But if you're looking for someone to do it for you, we're not the place for you. So, yeah, boy, I think you'd see a transformation of education in America. Because people with great ideas would show up in urban settings and just knock the socks off with these tiny little schools. You could run a school with 6 kids in a classroom at $20,000 a year? Are you kidding me? Who couldn't teach 6 kids? Like, who couldn't do that? You know? 6 kids, 20, do the math. Dude, that's a good living. You just love on those 6 kids, take them all the way through, you're set. Set. I mean, those kids would be set. Think about the communications between that teacher and those parents. I mean, it would transform education in America. That'd be awesome. So I think you could uncork it. And anybody who did a lousy job would be gone the next year because parents would have that money to take it any way they want. I'm going here. I'm going there. You know?
It sounds similar to a charter system.
Yeah, the only problem is the charter system is directed by New York State Board of Education. They just shut down. I have a good friend who's dialed into that, and they just shut down. Well, that's where they get a lot of it, where they get their funding, because they don't get all their funding. They don't get the full 19.4 from the state, and they have to teach the state curriculum, and they have to be responsible to the state tests. So, you know, it's like one hand tied behind their back, and now they're left-handed, and they still have to perform. And of course, they don't perform so well because they can't really do what they want to do, what they should do.
And our governor is trying to gear up towards all charter schools, really. I mean, to me, it looks like he's looking to close public schools, and he hates public school teachers anyway.
I don't know. I don't know enough. And you know, again, that's me. I don't care. I have no faith in it. I don't. You know, it's not. It's. I'm done. Wash my hands of it. They can. You know, it's going to rot. I'm not going to complain. I'm going to work on rubbing some salt into it. Good. Shoot as many arrows, salty arrows as I can right out. Send them out the door.
I'm one of those parents that my children were attending a Christian school, Spa Christian, until I had 2 children, and I just couldn't afford it.
Right.
So they went on to public school 4 years ago, and it's been a disaster ever since, honestly.
I believe it. Yeah. Yeah. So there you go. You want to know what you can do? Pay your tuition bills. I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. I am appalled that our churches, I've got nothing against foreign missions, but I'm appalled that our churches are sending, you know, tons of money abroad. And our primary responsibility is discipleship. And we've got parents who can't afford to properly educate their kids. You know, can't afford to not have the second job and stay home and homeschool them, or can't afford tuition at a school like ours. That's ridiculous. That there are churches that are doing that. That are watching people their own. That's nuts. That's absolutely bonkers. You know, that blows my mind. That is a, you know, we have a crisis of discipleship in America. What is it? 80+% of self-described Christian 20-somethings are, quote, graduating from their parents' faith by the time they finish their freshman year in college. What is that about? What is that about? You know, people say it's a crisis of discipleship. I would submit to you that it's not a crisis of discipleship. They are discipled. The problem is they're discipled into a split worldview. They've been taught from an early age that there are 2 worlds. There's the real world, and then there's Wednesday night and Sunday morning. And they just happen to be in this one right now. Shame on you for teaching them to be in that world. All right? You know, I love the picture of Caleb and Joshua being sent out to spy out the land. You know, they've left Egypt. The Israelites are on a roll. Everything's going great. And a bunch of spies are sent out into Canaan. Check it out. 2 come back and say, we can do this. This is exactly what we've been told. Rock on. Let's go. And the others come back with their tails between their legs and say, oh, it's a land that devours its inhabitants. You know, we're like grasshoppers in their eyes. Oh, we can't do it. What's the difference? Caleb and Joshua were not mighty men of valor. They just saw the world rightly. Their parents taught them math, science, history. They saw the world the way God does. And so when they saw it, they said, we can do this. The others were taught that 2 + 2 = 4 because it does. They were taught that there's truth apart from God, and they thought they were seeing some of that truth. God isn't sovereign here. This piece of the planet operates outside of God's provision and God's strength. We cannot survive here. And they fled. Caleb and Joshua said, there's nothing. There is no truth. There is no existence outside of God's sovereign hand. Let's do this.
How about extracurricular activities?
We have no extracurricular activities.
No music program?
Oh, music is not extracurricular. Music is curricular.
But I mean,
Art is curricular. If it's extra, it's yours. But every upper school student plays a musical instrument, participates in a Shakespeare production, sings in the choir, and has studio art. That's not extra in our mind. That's curricular. Absolutely. Yep. Athletics, we don't have such a bullish, it's not part of our 8 to 2:45 schedule. But we, the one requirement that the New York State Board of Regents places on independent schools, curricular-wise, is gym. Don't actually have to teach math or history or science, languages. Don't have to do that. As long as you're substantively equivalent, they're good. But the only specific curricular requirement is gym class, 2 periods per week. And we refuse. So we use something called alternate credit. So our upper school dismisses at 1:15 on Wednesdays, 2 periods before the end of the day. And we give it back to the parents and say, gym is not something we're going to do. What a dumb thing. Which one of you did not wish or doesn't wish that you spent more time outside with your kids? What a foolish thing for us to take that time and claim it for gym class when we can give it to you and you just tell us what you did. We went for a hike, we went bike riding, played hockey in the backyard with my kids. What a dumb thing for us to take. So we take as little as we can and we hem ourselves in as much as we can. If it's truly extra, I know you can do it because I've made sure you have the time to do it. We haven't taken your time, so you've got it. So when a parent comes to me and says, we really should have this, I said, fine. I know you can go do that. We had in the first year before we started, when it really started to come together and we knew we were headed in the right direction, we were sending people who we were expecting to be teachers or be board members to go visit other classical schools. And the words they came back with again and again, which really delighted us, and we dreamt that one day someone would say that about our school, were, that's the education I wish I had gotten. And to my delight, we hear that. We absolutely hear that now. We hear parents say, wow, I wish I had read these things. I wish I had been taught this way. And that's exactly what we start with a pedagogy that is a philosophy of learning, how people learn, that is consistent with their nature instead of inconsistent. John Dewey was trying to recreate our kids in his image rather than teach according to his image. We have no problem adopting Greek philosophies when it comes to education because even though the Greeks were a bunch of pagans and did some really crazy stuff, they at least honestly looked at their own children to decide how to educate them. Right? And they did things quite well because they were not trying to reshape them. They were just honestly looking at them. So we start with a pedagogy that works. And so the first answer is just that. Start with something that works. Don't work against them. And you're going to find that a lot of those things that students are struggling with suddenly aren't things they're struggling with. Now, in fairness, we're a small school, so there are going to be students with learning challenges and learning difficulties that we can't overcome just with the resources that we have. So we can't be the school for everyone, but I absolutely believe a classical pedagogy is for everyone. History has proven that. I think I mentioned we had a Chinese family visiting today, and honestly looking at children and seeing how they learn is not unique to Christendom. The Greeks did it. The Chinese had done it very, very well. When I was talking philosophy with these Chinese parents, they said, "Yes, this is exactly what we did in China." Of course. And then of course they said, "But you know what? Since '48, things have really started to decline." And I said, "Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine." Yeah. So that's my first answer. The second answer is that because just philosophically of our notion that education is discipleship, we're partnering with the parents. We're not on our own. We're not operating with, we're going to be the heroes and rescue this kid. Parents, that's their job. And we're partnering with them. So that partnership is really powerful. You can't deny that. And no parent would submit to 30 kids in a classroom who's in a partnership. A client might submit if they don't have the money to pay for something else, but a parent wouldn't. And so we have a max of 12 kids in a classroom, which that's a slam dunk right there. I mean, just a lot of things that are problems in other places, aren't going to be problems for us. We can overcome it. Here we have two parents right here. Two parents of graduates.
If I can speak to that, I have a couple of graduates from the school, and they have two things to say. They come back and will say, wow, thank you, Mom, for sending me to Augustine, because I know my math, I know my science, I know how to write, and my peers don't. They didn't realize that not everybody's getting the education that they got. So they realize that. And number two, this school aims for what is good, true, and beautiful. And the students here have so much charity and respect for each other. So these kids, for 4 years, how many days a week, are in an environment that is always building them up and teaching them respect. And then they go to college, and they become the students that they are the people that other students are drawn to. So they don't have a problem assimilating in the world.
So they become natural
They
leaders.
tend to be very steadying members in the world that other students are drawn to. So that's been my experience as a parent, is watching my Augustine graduates do very well, not just academically, but morally and spiritually. They're confident.
I
They're
have
very,
a
very
great story
confident.
related to this, not a student from our school, but a good friend of mine who classically homeschooled his kids, and he's a Princeton grad. And two of his kids went to Princeton. And when his first went off to Princeton, he exercised a privilege extended to alumni from Princeton. They can sit in and audit a class at Princeton anytime they like. And like most colleges, they presume that their incoming students, even at Princeton, can't read or write. That's what they presume. So they have this, anybody my age?
Remedial.
It's called, I went to Union, it was called Freshman Preceptorial, and it was make sure you learn how to read, make sure we assume you can't write a paper, so we're going to teach you how to do that so you can survive the rest of your 4 years. So she had to take, his first child to go to Princeton, had to take this Freshman Preceptorial class, I don't know what Princeton called it. And just like my experience, the faculty rotated through teaching the course. So there weren't any faculty who specialized in it. Everybody had to take a tour. So who's your favorite faculty member from Princeton?
Oh, you talk about me?
Yeah.
Asking
Do you have
me?
a favorite Princeton faculty member?
Jeez, I mean, I didn't go to school there.
No, but no, neither do I.
But I'm
Anybody have a favorite? Anybody have a favorite from?
Princeton Data Engineering School. I don't know.
I don't
There's
know,
a couple
no.
guys that come to mind, but I can't think of their names.
Anybody have a favorite?
A few standouts, I think, from Princeton.
She drew Peter Singer. Peter Singer is America's most prolific atheist author. He's the guy that everybody loves to hate because he fully lives out an atheistic worldview. Like he owns it. Where most atheists back off and say, "Well, yeah, I don't actually believe that. I can't live that." He's the guy who said, "Yeah, everybody in a wheelchair should be euthanized because their value is not as great because that's the only measuring stick. There's no right or wrong, good or bad. There's just useful, unuseful, and you're less useful in your wheelchair than I am standing, so you should be gone." And when challenged in the media, well, your mother had Alzheimer's. Why didn't you knock her off? And he said, well, because I should have, rightfully I should have, but my siblings would have been disappointed, and it is not useful for me to have siblings who are angry with me, so I didn't do it. And it's not useful for me to be in jail because I'd be jailed for that, so I didn't do it. But he said, yeah, I should have knocked her off. Okay, so this is who she has as a professor. And so Phil runs off to Princeton. 3 times a week she has class and sits in the back and watches his 17-year-old, 18-year-old daughter every day. Yes, Mr. Singer, I understand your presupposition here, but can you give a foundation for this? Why should anybody believe this? And she shut her down. She shut him down. It got to be, he could not operate within the class because she would always just ask the questions that everyone else was afraid to ask and didn't even know how to ask and hadn't even discerned that. What did you just say to us? And she's the one who's saying, well, okay, I hear your bias here, Mr. Singer, but can you please, and it changed the course of the class. That one 18-year-old girl shifted. She didn't shift Peter Singer. But every one of those kids realized, I don't have to just sit here and swallow everything that comes my way. She changed, 70 kids in the class or something, and she had a profound impact.
That's a great story.
Right. So, I think we're shooting arrows just like that into the culture. Princeton's going to be shifted. The culture's going to be shifted. All those kids are never going to forget that, wait a minute, when they read a Peter Singer article, he's in the New York Times every other weekend, they read him and they're like, oh yeah, that guy's full of it. I used to think he was really cool, but then I went to class, I heard him in class, and he couldn't back up a single thing he said. And I'm reading it right now, and I realize I've learned from that girl talking that I can read his words and I can look right through and say, no, premise, no conclusion. If you want to help make this school or another one like it stronger, I'm going to be blunt one more time. We would love your help. Absolutely. If you want to talk about sitting, I'll say it. If you want to talk about sitting on our board, we'd love to talk to you about that. But I'll tell you that sitting on our board is like being a parent in the school. We don't take it lightly. You're guarding the vision of the school. So please don't interpret that as they're desperate for people to sit on the board. We want more people on our board, but we are not going, just like we're not going to take any family, we're not going to take anybody on our board, because we guard that vision just like we guard the community of the school very, very carefully, just like you guard your family very carefully. But yeah, we would love your checks. We would love, and we have families, and if you don't want to give it to the school, I can tell you 3 or 4 families that we can direct your funds towards that are going to have a huge impact on the school and on the larger community. So yeah, we would love to, and this woman, I'm sure she'd love to talk with you too. It sounds silly, but I want to be blunt. You want to change this world? You want to change this culture? You want to have an impact on our country? It's going to happen through education, through schools. Your little slide, that bit about the American Socialist Party targeting schools. You know what the rallying cry in the turn of the century was, 1900s, from the American Communist Party was capture the robes, meaning the positions of authority. Who wears robes? College professors, judges, pastors. Capture the pulpits, capture the courts, capture the college lecterns.
It's the long march through our civilization.
Right, but the thing is, the kids we're sending out of school can wear those robes. They can actually wear them. They can capture them, but they can't wear them. Our kids will wear them.